So this section is all oriented around installation and setup. Nothing very glamorous, but a lot of critical content that we'll need to move forward. So the first thing we cover are the two main ways of using Git, from the command line and from graphical user interfaces. That isn't a very important distinction to understand. We'll be playing around with both throughout the course. And then we focus on installing Git. So I have separate instructions for Mac versus Windows users. That's definitely going to be critical. I marked it as yellow just because it can take a little bit of time if you're on a Windows machine. It's not hard. You just have to change some settings and watch the video. You'll see. We just click a bunch of times and hit next and then hit next and then hit next. But obviously very critical. We also install an application called GitKraken. It's a GUI for Git. It's free. I guess it's not critical. You don't have to use it if you want to use Git, but I'm going to put it as important/critical because for this course, we'll be using this, but it is not critical to Git itself. Configuring your Git name and email, critical, but also very quick and easy. And then the biggest question mark in this section is the terminal crash course videos. There are 3 videos at the end of this section that are absolutely critical if you have no experience working with terminal commands, basic Unix commands like ls and cd and touch. So if you're familiar with those, you can skip those videos, and they're not critical. They're not really Git specific at all. So if you have experience, you can skip those, but if it's all new to you, I 100% would sit through them. You don't need to take notes, but practice along with those videos. They are very important. If you want to be able to use Git down the line, we have to be able to navigate through the terminal. So most things in this section are critical, but no big concepts. It's just installation, plus this weird thing at the end with the terminal. I highly recommend checking that out if you're new. All right, so before we go on to installation, we're about to do that, we need to start by talking about the 2 options for how we interact with Git. We can use the terminal, a text-based interface, and we can use graphical user interfaces. So since it was originally created and still to this day, Git is largely or primarily a terminal-based tool, a text-based interface. It's used mostly by developers and has been for a long time, and most developers are comfortable using the command line. So it's not the most user-friendly experience, it's certainly not the most beautiful, but it's at the core of Git. It's what Git was really built to do originally. With that said, as Git's popularity has increased, so have a number of GUIs, graphical user interfaces, applications, pieces of software you download that make it easier, or at least more visual, more graphical, to interact with Git. There are quite a few of these different applications out there, these different GUIs, for all different platforms. Some of the more common ones are GitHub Desktop, SourceTree, Tower, GitKraken, Ungit. There's actually a whole list here on the Git website. You can see quite a few of them. Some of them are free, some of them are not, some of them you have to buy, some of them are subscriptions, they have different tiers, but they all have the same goal, to help visualize and not just like visually show you stuff, but help you interact with Git using your mouse and buttons instead of using the terminal. So just as a quick example, here I have a Git project open using my terminal. If I want to see a history of all the different people who have collaborated or all the different checkpoints, here they all are. This is what it looks like in my terminal. This is a graphical user interface. It's a lot prettier. It's the exact same project. 2048 is the name of it. This is much prettier and in some ways a lot easier to understand. However, it may not be faster in all situations. For somebody who's well-versed with the terminal, with the command line, who's already using it day to day, this is still fastest. It's what's most comfortable. It takes time to get to that point. And I'm not telling you, one way or the other is better, but using a terminal is going to be expected of you if you are a developer or if you plan on being a developer. And you can do things in one line of code here, one command. That might take 3 or 4 button clicks. But at the same time, this opens the doors to all sorts of people to use Git and interact with Git who aren't super command line savvy, right? This is a pretty terrible interface, objectively. So I'll just quickly run through sort of the pros and cons. Using these graphical user interfaces, there's a much lower barrier of entry. That's always great. Friendlier to use, can be a much more positive experience. And for some users who are experienced with the command line, they still may prefer the visual experience of a GUI. Now, some of the cons are that there's a lot of magic involved with the graphical user interfaces. Some of them really obfuscate or they abstract away what's happening behind the scenes. So you may not really understand what your button clicks are doing, and that can work for you 99% of the time. But then when things go wrong, it can be a problem. Also, these GUIs can lead to users being dependent on one piece of software because they do change one GUI to the next. Even if they are similar, they have different buttons, different approaches, different labels for things, different windows and all of that. So, I'm very pro GUI, to be honest with you. However, the command line has a lot going for it as well. If you can get past the fact that it's not beginner friendly, it's ugly, and it's often not the best experience if you're designing it from scratch. If you can get past those cons, it can be a lot faster once you get comfortable. There are some features that you can really only do or interact with on the command line. Git features, but also a whole bunch of other features. The commands are always going to be the same from one command line to the next, assuming you're using a Unix-based shell. It doesn't matter whose machine you're on or which machine you're on. The commands are consistent, and Git is created as a command line tool. So all the documentation, tutorials, resources, they're all oriented around the command line. So there's a lot going for both sides. Unfortunately, there's kind of a lot of gatekeeping around people using GUIs, that it's somehow lesser or you're not really using Git. It's kind of garbage. It's BS. In my opinion, we will be using both in this course, not side by side, but rather I will be teaching using the command line. That's really the assumed way of interacting with Git still to this day. If you have plans on being a developer, if you are a developer already, command line is just part of that package. You've got to know how to interact with it. So I'll be showing you how to use Git from the command line, but I'll also be illustrating concepts using a GUI. I will be translating what we do. So I'll show you, here's this one thing we can do where we make a new branch, or here's how we merge, blah, blah, blah. And then here's how you can do the same thing in a GUI. So we'll be using a GUI in particular called GitKraken. This is this lovely logo here. We will be installing it and setting it up in a video in this section. But first, we're going to install Git on our command line. So if you're on a Mac, there'll be a video for installing Git on a Mac. And if you're on a PC, there'll be a video for installing Git on a Windows machine. Alrighty, so hopefully that explains a little bit about the differences or the two ways of interacting with Git. There's the hideous but very, very common command line, ubiquitous amongst Git users. And then there's this fractured world of user interfaces, graphical user interfaces, that vary quite a bit. Some of them aren't full-featured, others are quite powerful, but they all have the goal of making it easier or more visual to work with Git. So we'll be using both, but primarily the command line first, and I will actually have a crash course on how to use the command line in this section as well. Okay, so this is the Windows Git installation video. If you're not on a Windows machine, I guess you're welcome to join us if you want, but I would just move on and go to the next video. Installing Git on a Windows machine it's not complicated, but it's a little bit trickier than to do it on a Mac. And the reason for this is that Git was designed, it was created, if you watch that video where I did the brief history of Git, it was created to run on a Unix-based interface. It was designed for Linux, because the guy who created it, Linus Torvald, also created Linux. Okay, the problem that we run into on a Windows machine is that Windows machines don't come with a Unix-based prompt by default. Windows comes with a different command line interface called command prompt. It's not Unix-based. If you don't know what Unix is, it's not a big deal. You don't need to know what it is. It just causes an issue here. Git wants to run with a Unix-based interface. And there's this shell, this thing called bash, that is a default shell for Linux machines and for Macs. So it's a lot easier on those machines. We don't have to go jump through any hoops. On a Windows machine, we have to download something called Git bash, which we're about to do. And Git bash is going to emulate a bash, a Unix experience on our Windows machine. And it comes with Git also. So some people actually use Git bash without even touching the Git portion. They just want the bash portion. Anyway, you'll see, it's not too bad. It's a single package we download, and then it's just a couple of menus and settings that we have to walk through. So that's all we're going to do here. If none of that explanation made sense to you, don't worry. We'll just install it and it should work. But if you're curious, this is kind of the issue at the core of why it's a little trickier on Windows. Git was not designed to run on a Windows machine originally. So there's just an extra hurdle or two. Okay, let's go. All right, so the first thing we need to do is go to the Git homepage, the Git website, and download the Git installer for Windows. So I've included in the resources a link. It's also just git-scm.com. I never remember that. I just Google or Bing Git and then click the link. So I'm going to click download, just the version that it's suggesting for me on my Windows machine. You can see the other options, 62 and 64 bits. But anyway, it looks like it finished. So I'm going to open this up. Alrighty, I'm going to click yes. Do I want to allow it to make changes? And is there a way to make this larger? It does not look like it. So I'll try zooming in post-production to make this a little bit easier for you to see. It's quite small on this large screen. Anyway, I'm going to click next. This is the license. I've read the entire thing. All right, I'll hit next. Then it's asking where I want to install it. I'll leave the default. So C drive, program files, Git. Next up here, I'm just going to leave all of these defaults. So I'm not going to check or uncheck anything. And click next. And then it's saying the name of the shortcut that it creates for me. I'll just call it Git. And that's good to go. Now this is one spot where I recommend actually deviating from the default. So it's asking us to choose the default text editor that Git uses. Now the default that it uses right now is something called Vim. It is kind of a nightmare if you've never used it. The commands and it's all done via text in the terminal. A lot of people use it, but way more people are scared of it and confused by it. So I recommend switching this over to VS Code or Visual Studio Code. So this is a brand new install of Windows on my computer. I don't actually have VS Code yet, so I'm going to click this. Use Visual Studio Code as Git's default editor. And it doesn't let me hit next because I don't have it installed. So I'm going to click that link and just open it up and then download for Windows. We won't need this text editor right away, and you don't have to use this editor either. I have a video where I explain how to get out of Vim and how to use Vim in one context. So if you want to use Vim, you can do that. Or if you have some other editor that you like, feel free to use that instead. So this is a pretty quick install. Just accept the agreement. Location is fine. That's good to go. And then I'm going to leave this checked, add to path. We want that. And I'm going to click this, register code as an editor for supported file types. So that the bottom two checkboxes there. And then I'll click next, install, and hopefully that goes pretty quickly. And then while that finishes up, I guess I do actually have to wait for it to finish in order to go back to the other installer for Git. Okay, so that finished. We could launch it right now, but we really don't need it. All that we need that for is so that we can use VS Code as the default editor. So it doesn't register that we actually have that. I'm going to click back and next again. Okay, now it's working. So we still have Visual Studio Code selected, and now I can click next. And then here, this is a bigger topic actually that we're not going to go into a whole lot right now, but a bigger topic we discussed throughout the course. In late 2020, there's been a push, without going into too much detail, there's been a push to rename the default branch in Git and GitHub from master to main or some other similar name like trunk or development. We'll talk more about what this means. We haven't talked about branches at all, so that probably makes no sense. I'm actually going to say let Git decide and keep it as the current default branch name. But later on, I will show you how to change the default branch name. We'll talk about how to work with main instead of master, and we'll cover all of this. So to keep things simple and to keep you sort of in sync with the standard documentation and tutorials you'll see in the world right now, we're going to just let Git decide. All right, and then I'll leave this alone as well. Okay, I'm going to click next again. Leave this as use the OpenSSL library. So on this page or this screen, we're going to leave the top option selected. Check out Windows style, commit Unix style line endings. It doesn't matter what that does right now, but we're going to pick that first one. And then we have this screen, which terminal emulator do we want to use? If you want to follow along with me and what I'll be using, throughout the course I'm using a Mac, but on the Windows specific videos, I'll be using this first one, min-tty. And then we're going to select default, just the default option that's already selected for us. And then, we'll just keep this one selected, Git Credential Manager Core. We'll enable file system caching that's already selected. Okay, we're good to go. And we don't need to enable support for sudo consoles, so we don't need to select that. And then we click install. And we wait for this to finish. And I'll probably fast forward. All right, so it looks like it finished up. Let's launch it. So we'll click launch git bash, and then we can get rid of this. I don't care to see the release notes personally. And then we'll click finish. So you'll probably see, or hopefully see, a prompt that looks something like this. Your name will be different. And I just full screened it to make it hopefully legible. And for now, the last thing we'll do, just to verify that Git is installed, is run the command git -- version. So as long as we see something here, and you should see something here, if you have this, if you're able to see this window after that installation, then I can't think of a situation where Git would not be installed. But just to verify, we can run this git -- version. The Git command is being recognized, and we should be good to go. Now, one thing I'll mention is if you do close out of this, you get rid of this terminal window. If we shut that down, if you want to reopen it and have access to it again, a pretty reasonable request, you can just search for git bash. That's the name of the application we want to run or open. So git bash, and then we get back to this window. Okay? So if you're on a Windows machine, this window is where you will be working when you see me working on my Mac terminal. I'll talk about some of the minor differences in commands, but overall it should be a pretty smooth experience now that we have it installed. Okay, so let's talk about installing Git on a Mac. Most Macs these days actually come with Git pre-installed, and normally that will work fine. However, this course is actually using some of the newer features in Git, some new syntax that older versions don't contain. So you want to make sure that you're using Git 2.23, 2.23, and above. And the easiest way to do that is to open up a terminal app. I'll just be using throughout this course the built-in terminal utility on a Mac. So it's in Applications, Utilities, Terminal. But I usually just search for it, and honestly, it's pretty much always open on my machine. All right, so the command that we'll run to check our version is git -- version. So I see 2.24.3. I really don't need to upgrade or update, but just to show you how to go through with it, if you go to the Git documentation, the link I've included as a resource with this video, and you click download, it will detect if you're on a Mac. Download the latest version for Mac. So it looks like there's different types of releases. We're going to click this one here, not the source release, but the release it's suggesting for Mac. Okay, and so nothing is going to start installing just yet, but what we're going to do next is click on binary installer. And you really don't need to worry about this and panic if things aren't going great. Remember, you already have Git installed, and if you already have something above 2.23, then I wouldn't stress about it. The differences are all very, very minor, probably have nothing to do with the videos in this course. But I'm going to just show you how to do this. So we're going to click this link where it says, Tim Harper provides an installer for Git. Okay, and then we're going to select the latest version here, which for me is 2.27. And then we just wait for it to download. So there it is. And then we'll have to open that up. Here we are. We just double click on the package. And then I'm going to have to go into my system preferences and say, no, it's okay. Don't worry about this. So I'll go into the security and privacy tab of my system preferences. And then I'm going to click open anyway. And then I'm going to click open. Okay, now we make it to the installer. Continue. Install, password or fingerprint, depending on your Mac, and we'll wait a little bit. All right, it says installation was successful. We'll move it to the trash. All right, So it may seem like our version has not changed, right? I run git -- version again in my terminal. It still says 2.24.3, but if I open a new window or even just a new tab, this is a new tab. If I run the same command, we now see we actually have the latest version. So you just need to open a new window, a new tab, you can verify. Don't worry if you don't have exactly 2.27, just aim to have greater than 2.23. And even if you don't, the differences really will only come up with 1 or 2 commands. But it's pretty easy to install. Hopefully you don't run into any major issues. And if you do, we have TAs, of course, to help you out. But really, it's just a package you install. The most annoying part these days on a Mac is clicking all of the security system preferences stuff. All right, so we now have Git installed. Next up, I'm going to talk about something called GitKraken. Okay, so now that we have installed Git, whether you're on a Mac or a Windows machine, the next thing we need to do is configure our name and email. So we need to tell Git who we are, who it should attribute work to on our machine. So this is not tied to an account necessarily. There's no password. You can make this whatever you want, but let me just demonstrate the significance of setting up our name. So if I'm working on a project with a bunch of people, for example, this is a project I have. I really haven't done anything. I'm sort of faking it. It's React, which is a very large JavaScript library. I'm going to just run a quick command here. And what you're looking at right now, I'll full screen this, is a log of different work, different checkpoints on this application and who did them. So here's one made by me, Colt Steele. But I can go back and see, here's some other work done by someone named Andrew Clark. And somebody else did some other work. Here's more Andrew Clark. Here's Brian Vaughn. So the point here is that, here's Dan Abramov, pretty famous developer. Anyway, the idea is that Git knows who did what work and who is making these checkpoints and these changes. So we need to configure that. So this does not have to match some account that you have somewhere else. However, I recommend that you use the name that you want to be known by as a developer if you are going to publish your work and put it up on GitHub. You want to use a name that people know you by or that will be consistent. You don't want to be changing this all the time. And then your email, I recommend configuring with the email that you'll set up for your GitHub account. If you haven't done so already, later in the course when we talk about GitHub, we can cross that bridge. And you can always reconfigure these two values. So here's how we do it. The first step, we'll do our name. So all we do is git config and then -- global. That's a way of telling Git to set our username or our user.name to be the same name across every time we use Git, every instance. But you can always change this. So git config -- global user.name, and then in quotes, the name you want Git to know you by. So I can try this right now. I'm not going to configure it. I want to show you, I can actually just check. Do you have a user.name for me already, Git? If I run this command, I'm not setting it, I'm asking. And it says, yep, you're Colt Steele. However, on my Windows side, if I do git config user.name, I haven't configured one, so it shows me nothing. So I'm going to set that now. So git config -- global user.name, and then in quotes, the name I want. So git config -- global user.name, and I'll do Colt Steele. Obviously, you should put your name there. I'm going to hit enter. We don't really see anything happen. But now if I try and retrieve it, that's what this line does. Git, what is user.name? It tells me Colt Steele, and we're good to go. Now we're going to do the same thing for email. So it's the exact same pattern, except user.email, and then provides your email address. So we'll try this. It's the same process. I'll do this on the Windows side, but whatever platform you're on, you want to do this. We'll do git config user.email. Nothing is there. But now I'm going to say git config -- global user.email, and then set it to be, this is not my real email, but colt@gmail.co. Again, not my real email, but I recommend you put an email you have access to, and especially when we sign up for a GitHub account, if you can foresee the email you would use for GitHub, I would use that email now. But we can always change it. It's the exact same line to change it. Okay, so now I can recall the line from earlier. If you don't know how to do this, hit the up arrow. I can scroll through different lines up and down, and I'm just going to verify. Did it set? And it did. Okay. So that's all we needed to do. Those two lines are going to tell Git who we are so that for future work, when we make changes, they are attributed to whatever that user.name and user.email are set to. All right. Okay, so one other tool I recommend you install, definitely not necessary to use Git, but I am going to use it throughout the course to illustrate and to help visualize what's happening at times, is a GUI called GitKraken. So as I mentioned earlier, there are lots of options for graphical user interfaces, GUIs, for Git. GitKraken is a great free one that I think looks pretty nice. Here it is in action. So I've already installed it on my Mac. It's a single click to download it, and then there's an installer, so I'll demonstrate that. But I think it looks pretty good. It's just a nice tool to help us visualize, what's happening here, all this history and these weird branches and mergings and stuff we haven't covered at all, of course, that we will soon. And then we can compare and see changes between files. See if I can demonstrate some of that. Anyway, it's just a nice tool. It's free. There is a paid version that includes some other features, but the bulk of what we need, or everything we need, is free. So click on the link in the description, or the resource I've included, gitkraken.com, download for free, and then follow the instructions. So I'm doing this on my Windows side. It's hard to tell maybe, but I'm on Windows. And I'm going to wait for that to finish up. Oh, it did. I'm going to open it. If you're on the Mac or on a Mac, do the same thing, of course. Open the file. Are you opening? Here it is. It's installing. And let's see, we got this cute animation of a squid. Okay. So it does prompt us for an email and a password. This is not tied to Git itself. It's asking you to make a GitKraken account, or if you happen to have a GitHub account already, this will be the easiest option. But I do have a GitHub account, but just to simulate the fact that I don't on this machine, on my Windows side, I could create a GitKraken account. I've got to just put in a name and an email. So I'll just do Colt and then, Colt@gmail.co, not my real email. I'll do a silly password, purple, horrible password. Does it even let me do that? Okay, how about purple, green? All right, I've read and I've agreed. Okay. Now, of course, if you're not comfortable signing up for another account, another service, well, you're going to need GitHub through the course, so I recommend just registering for that anyway. Otherwise, we'll run into some issues down the line. But there are alternative GUIs. I'm using this not as an integral part of the course that you have to follow along with, but more as a tool to help teach and help illustrate things. It's just much more visual and hopefully more engaging. Okay. So then it's asking me to put a name and email in here. I always make sure this matches what I've configured Git with, what we did just a little while ago. So we configured Git to have, a name and an email. I would do the same thing. So same name and same email, but it also here will actually update your Git config if you want it to update from here. Anyway, this is not a big deal. So I would just make them match. So I'll do what I did earlier, colt@gmail.co. Okay, save changes. And now I'm in, and we don't really have anything to do yet, but you should see something like this. And eventually, once we start working, we'll see something more like this. So I believe the Windows and Mac versions are very, very similar. I have both of them open here, although I don't have a repository open over here. The UI, I think, is identical. If there are any changes, I'll do my best to point them out. All right, so we have GitKraken, and now let's get Kraken on the rest of the course. Okay, so this is an optional crash course on basic Unix commands. If you are familiar with these commands, I'll run through them very quickly. Things like ls and pwd and cd and touch and mkdir, make dir, rm-rf. If you know those commands already, or you're familiar enough with them, then I would just skip the next 3 videos, right? You can always come back to these. They have nothing to do with Git on their own, but they play a very important role. And if you are not familiar with them, if you're new to the terminal, 100% stick it out through these videos. I know it's not the most exciting thing on earth, but let's be honest, neither is Git. It's very important, but it's not the sexiest topic. So the reason this all matters is that I'll be teaching Git primarily from the command line. So I'll be doing things like, just as an example, everyone, I'm going to move into this folder here. And to do that, I would use the cd command, which we have not yet discussed. And then in here, I'd like to make a new file called, my app.js file. And then we'll run some git command in here, do some git stuff. Again, haven't talked about any of this, but I'll do things like that. And then we'll run another command, and then we'll back out. The point is that we'll be navigating through the terminal, moving to different locations, different folders, manipulating files, making changes, deleting, creating things, and then interacting with Git from here. We'll run commands that are specific to Git and the folder that we're in. So if you are comfortable with those basic commands I've already laid out, skip the next few videos. If you're not familiar, don't freak out. This is stuff that it's easy, but it takes a bit of time for it to really stick. The hardest part is remembering the commands. So I recommend you just put some sticky notes up or a cheat sheet just to come back to these commands. No one's expecting you to know them by heart after 3 videos. It takes a while for my bootcamp students, in person at least, to start working with these commands like they're second nature. Because they're not. It's kind of a horrible interface. But you force yourself to use it and you'll get comfortable. Last thing I'll say is if you're on a Mac, I'll be using the terminal app. And if you're using a Windows machine, as we installed Git, we set up Git bash. So my screen will look like this on the Windows side. Either one, right? The commands are 99.9% identical. So if you see me do a command like ls on the Windows side or on the Mac side, they both are going to do the same thing. All right. So let's get started. Remember, completely optional, but I highly recommend sticking it out through these videos. If you don't know the terminal commands, if you don't know the basic Unix commands that I quickly ran through, cd, touch, make directory, rm, ls, pwd, those are going to be pretty important for the rest of the course so that we can work with Git. All right, I'll shut up. Let's get started. All right, so in this video, I'm going to run through some of the essential terminal commands for navigation, for moving around on your machine. We need this in order to work with Git. If you already know these commands, things like ls and pwd and cd, if you know those commands, feel free to skip this, of course. But if you don't, I'm going to run through this quickly, but also I recommend you take some time to practice and just keep a reference or a cheat sheet up that you can look back at, because I'll be using a lot of these commands throughout the course, but nothing super difficult, I promise. The hardest part is just remembering them. Okay. So I've got my Mac window here. I've got my terminal open, just the terminal app on Mac. So if you're following along with a Mac, you'll look at this screen, and then occasionally when there is a small deviation or difference on a Windows machine, here is my Windows terminal. This is the bash or git bash shell that I've opened up. So if you installed that on a Windows machine, it will look something like this. So the first command we'll talk about is called ls. It is short for list the contents of a folder or of the current directory. So if you type ls into your terminal and you hit enter, wherever you currently are, and we haven't learned how to move yet, so we'll talk about where we currently are. Wherever that location is, we will see the contents printed out. So in this case, I'm in a folder that contains some JavaScript files, a HTML file, a CSS file, a llamas Python file, a folder called secret. That is what's printed out, at least in this slide. So if I try it over here, this is a brand new terminal window. I just made a new tab. I haven't moved. I haven't talked about moving. Where am I? Well, I'm at a location called the home directory, and it's abbreviated or it's symbolized by this tilde character. You can find that above a tab key on most keyboards. Anyway, my home directory contains a lot of things. If I hit ls, you won't see all of these. Some of them are standard on a Mac, like applications, desktop, documents, downloads, public, pictures. Some of them are my folders I've made, like, Git demo, Git stuff. What else? Pets, terminal demo. Those are my folders I've made. Anyway, you'll see something, right? You'll see contents of your home directory. And if you're on a Windows machine, we can do the same thing using git bash. So ls. Now I see different things because there are different files and folders on a Windows machine, but I'm in the same location on this Windows machine, tilde, that is my home directory. All right, so we can't move right now. We're just simply looking at files and folders in one location, and I'm going to show you a command that I don't have a slide for. On a Mac, the command is open. If we type open dot, it's actually going to open up in Finder on a Mac. The file explorer is called Finder, the same directory where I currently am. So this is my home directory. And if you've never used a terminal, you're probably familiar with this sort of navigation, right? If I want to look at my courses folder, I double click. If I want to go back, I click the back arrow. That's kind of the basic navigation without the terminal. Now, if I'm on a Windows machine, the open command actually does not work. It tells me command not found. But instead, I can do start dot. This is really the one major difference I can think of so far. And then this opens up the Windows equivalent of Finder. I think it's called File. Is it File Explorer? I'm not much of a Windows user. Anyway, probably shouldn't admit that. You can see the folders and files that are listed here. So we've got pictures as an example. And if I do start dot, I can see, all right, here's the pictures folder. We have videos. There's a videos folder there. So all of those things that we see represented here are also here. It's just two different ways of interacting or viewing the contents of this folder. All right, so that's ls on its own, just ls, nothing afterwards. You hit enter, and it shows us what is in the current directory. But I can also use ls on a folder. So I could say, what's inside this pets folder? And all I need to do is reference the path. So the name, in this case, is pets, so ls pets. And that's what's inside that pets folder. And I can actually open that folder too if I just do open pets. And it opened on my other screen. Let me drag this up. There we are. You can see those contents, cats, chickens, hamsters, and so on. All right. I'll do that on a Windows machine as well. Let's say I want to know what is inside of this Git course directory. So I can do ls git, and I need to spell it correctly, but I can also hit tab to autocomplete. And it looks like it's an empty directory. Well, that's my fault for picking that one. Let's try another one. How about what is in Git stuff? I don't know. I don't remember making that, but we'll try ls git stuff. Okay, there's one folder called demo. Not very exciting, but hopefully you get the idea here. We can use ls with nothing afterwards. Also, there's a command called clear. I'll just show because I'll be using this. It kind of annoys me when I have a lot of stuff in my terminal. So that goes away. So that has nothing to do with navigation. So as I was saying, ls on its own will list the contents of our current directory. ls followed by the name of a directory. Like I could do pets, as I've shown you. I see the files in pets. It's a bunch of folders actually. And if I wanted to look at, let's say, the goats directory, or how about the cats directory? I can't do ls cats because there is no cats directory where I currently am. Remember, this is what I see, right? I currently am viewing, or I'm inside this home directory. That's what I see when I type ls. I have to type out the path to access cats. It's inside of pets. So it's actually this, ls pets/cats. And there we are. It's one of my cats. Her name is Blue Steel. And that's all I'll show you with ls. We can reference these paths where we chain things together. Anyway, the next command I'll show you is pretty simple. It's called pwd for print working directory. And what this will do, it's very simple. It just prints out your current location. It prints out the path to where you currently are. So we haven't been able to move, right? We haven't changed locations yet. We've been able to peek into other folders with ls, but pwd is, if I just type it like that, it's going to give me the exact location where I am right now. So the home directory here is just short. That little tilde is a short way of referencing this location. My user on here is called Colt Steel. That is where I currently am. But if I'm on my Windows machine, it's quite different. It's similar, but it's different because on a Windows machine, we've got this C drive, right? So C/users/Colt Steel. And that's obviously going to be your username. So probably not Colt Steel. So that is where we currently are. If I type pwd, that's my location. And that brings me to our next command, which is cd for change directory. This is how we move around. It's the equivalent, if I do open, it's the equivalent of double clicking on one of these things, right, and moving between folders. I'm now in a different folder. You could think of this is my current directory. Now if I click here, this is my current directory. And if I click in pictures, that's my current directory, and there's one of my chickens, Stevie Chicks. All right, So if I want to change directories from the terminal, which I'll be doing all the time in the course, I use cd followed by the directory that I'm trying to change into. So I often use ls first. What do we have? Let's go into this code directory. You probably don't have that, but you could pick any other folder of yours and cd into it. So cd code. All right. So my prompt changes. It tells me I'm in the code folder. Your prompt will look different, but it likely will reveal to you where you are. But if not, you can always type pwd, and we see, oh, now I'm in users /code. So just to illustrate this, if I were to open the current folder, now I'm in the code folder, not the home directory. And I can continue to move, but first, if I type ls, now we see completely different contents. A lot of stuff in this code folder. This is from one of my other courses. And I could take a look at any of these other locations. How about, CSS intro, 04 CSS intro. So cd 04, and I'm just gonna hit tab to autocomplete for me. And if I cd into that, I type pwd, if I can spell it. Notice my working directory, my current location has changed. And if I type ls, we now see the contents. And if I open, this is what we're looking at in Finder. Text properties, CSS intro, and then a zip file right there. Same thing on a Windows machine. If I pick some folder to cd into, how about, I don't really know. I don't have much on here, but let's go into desktop maybe. I'm not sure what's on there. So cd desktop, and I'm going to clear. And now if I type pwd, my working directory, my location has changed. I'm now on my home directory, c/user/coldsteel on a Windows machine /desktop. If I type ls, oh, there's nothing on here. Well, that's underwhelming. And that actually leads me to my next command, which is a variation of cd. cd followed by 2 dots. This is how we move backwards. So remember, I showed you this example in Finder. If I open this up, if I want to cd into this, if I want to double click in, and then I decide, I want to go back, I just click the back arrow. But using cd, what we actually can do is cd ... And this will take us back one level, one folder. So we back up. So currently, I'm in this CSS intro folder. This is what's inside of it. If I do cd ... and I type pwd, this is where I am now. That's where I was before. I'm now one level back right here. And I could do it again, cd ... First, let me just show you the contents, all that stuff. cd ... Now I'm back in my home directory. So same thing over here. I'm in the desktop, or I'm on the desktop. There's nothing to look at. It's empty. cd ... And now I'm in my home directory. So that's the very basics of navigation. We'll get more practice in the next video as we talk more about some other commands like making folders and files and deleting folders and files. Along with those commands, we still need to use cd, pwd, and ls all the time. So you'll get practice if you're new to this, but also keep in mind, you're not going to just memorize it and become a terminal genius overnight. It takes time and it feels a little bit clunky when you're starting out. You don't need to feel like an expert before you move on to learn Git. Just make a cheat sheet, some sticky notes to remind yourself of the 5 or 6 commands that we cover, and stick them on your computer and just look at that if needed. Anyway, that's the basics of navigation. We covered ls for list, pwd for print working directory, and cd for change directory. cd ... backs out one folder. And the other thing we did was open. Open ... will open a folder, the current folder that we're looking at. And on a Windows machine, it's start ... Okay. All right. So the next group of commands I'm going to show you have to do with file and folder creation, as well as deletion or destruction. So we've seen how to navigate around, but another really important piece is being able to make new files. So normally the way we would make a new file without the terminal would probably involve opening up some application, like I use VS Code. I have it open, Visual Studio Code, and then I could go File, New, or just Command N, and then start making a file, whatever type of file this is. Let's say it's a JavaScript file. I can put some JavaScript in it. Hello. It doesn't matter if you don't know JavaScript. And then I can save this file, and then I pick a destination, right? And I give it a name like app.js with a .js extension, and then I select somewhere for that to go. That's the typical workflow for creating a new file. If you're not doing it from a text editor or from some, whatever, Excel or Photoshop or something, you open an application and you create a file in the application. But instead, we can use a command called touch. Touch, Touch. It doesn't actually stand for anything like the other commands where we have, cd is change directory. Touch is just touch. It has a secondary use we're not really going to go into, where you can touch a file that already exists and you're simply updating the modified time. It really doesn't matter for now. If it helps, just think of it as a very weird name because it is very odd. If I were designing it, there'd be a command called, create or make or something. Anyway, so all that we need to do is run touch and then a space and then a file name or multiple that we want to create. And when we hit enter, wherever we currently are, whatever directory we're in, there will now be a file, in this case called purple.txt. So I'll demonstrate this. I'll clear. And I'm currently in my home directory. So I can just make a file right here if I want to. Why don't I open Finder just so you have it? So you can see it over there. I know it's not that easy to read. Unfortunately, this is the largest I can make these icons, but you're not missing much. Anyway, over here, I'm going to create a file. What should we call this one? How about purple.js? So it's a JavaScript file called purple. So we don't really see anything change, but if I type ls now, we see a file that's been created. And over here, in my Finder window, I can see purple.js. So I can also make multiple at once. I could do red.txt for a text file and orange, what's another, .py for a Python file. I could even make a PDF file. These are all going to be completely empty, just an empty shell of a file with a name and an extension. So why don't I do yellow.pdf? That just made me 3 files in one go. Red, orange, and yellow. I can see them here if I run ls, or I can see them over here by inspecting them with my eyes, I guess. Navigating, I can see them purple, orange, red, and yellow.pdf. It is a true PDF file. My Mac is displaying the PDF icon. I can do the same thing, of course, over here. On my Windows side, let's see, ls. We're in the home directory, so I could make a file here. Let me clear this. Touch, how about magenta.txt? If I type ls, that will show up right there. And if I go to the File Explorer, start, here it is, magenta. And it's a totally empty file, and I can open it from here. Select what to open it with, sure, Notepad, and then I can start working on it. But I don't have anything to work on, so I'm just gonna ignore that. Okay, so that's the basic concept of touch. The next thing I wanna show you is how we can make new folders. So touch is how we make new files. We can make as many as we want in a single go. Just separate the names by spaces, specify an extension, and those files will be created in your current directory. So I guess I should illustrate, if I change directories into something else. For example, what should I do? Let's go on the Windows side. I don't have anything on my desktop. If I cd into desktop, I type ls, there's nothing there. But if I touch a file, how about touch cyan.js? Now I have a file on my desktop, and I'm sure I could show that to you. Here it is, the only file on my desktop. So where I am when I run this command touch, that is where the file will be created. Although you can actually create a file somewhere else that you're currently not inside. For example, I could create a file inside of pets. I am not in the pets directory. All I need to do is touch and then the path to get to pets from where I am. I am in this folder, so I would reference pets, which is somewhere here. Where are you? Here it is. And then maybe inside of horses, I could create a file. So I could do touch pets / horses / how about Rocky dot, I don't know, a PNG file, which you normally wouldn't create an empty PNG, but there we go. And we see it created over here. I'm not going to see it in my home directory. It's not here. I could cd into pets. I still won't see it. I could cd into horses, and now I see it. All right. So that's the basics of making files. You can make them in a different location as long as you reference the correct path from where you are, or you just make them in the current location where you are. Whatever you see when you type pwd, if you try and create a new file with touch.txt or whatever the file is, you're creating it in this location. And there we are. There's our second horse. Good old Rocky and ask.txt. Okay, the next thing we need to know how to do is make folders. So to make a directory, the command is make dir or make dir. I guess you pronounce it directory. So make dir. I always say make dir in my head. It doesn't matter. mkdir. So this command, you follow it up with the name of a directory you want to create. It works in the same way as touch. You can pass in multiple, separate them by spaces, and by default, they'll be created in your current location, in your working directory. So let's go to the pets directory. Right now I'm in this horses directory, so I'm going to back out. Okay. And I want to make a new type of pet in this directory. So what should I do? Frogs. How about turtles? So we'll make a new directory. So not touch, but mkdir turtles. And it doesn't have to be capitalized. I'm just doing that because all these other directories are. And if I show you over here, there's no turtles folder. But now there is. And it's empty. So if I type ls, I see turtles. I can cd into turtles. I can create a file in here. What's a famous turtle? I guess there's Lonesome George, who technically is a tortoise, but we'll make a file for him. How about a Python file? Great. And then I could even make another folder in here. What should I call this folder? Instead of turtles, let's make two directories. How about C turtles? And this is actually an important note. You don't want to put spaces in your names of files. We want to, especially if we're using make directory, it's going to think this is two directories we want to make. C space turtles. If you really wanted a space, you could do this with quotes, but I don't recommend having spaces in there. It just causes problems. So do C dash turtles, C turtles like this, C underscore turtles. It doesn't matter. So I'll make a directory for C turtles, and then we'll just call them land turtles. Sure, I don't think that's the right term actually, but here we are. I now have two directories and a file inside of turtles. So two empty folders I just made, and then I can fill out their contents. So that's make directory. You just pass in a name. I'll quickly demonstrate this on a Windows machine. I'm on the desktop. I'll make a folder here, mkdir. How about, I don't know, cars. And I'll do two at a time, cars and bikes. And then if I want to view them, I could do ls, I see them, right? And they're visually represented differently, a different color, and then also a slash after their name. But I could also view my desktop. And then I see the two empty folders plus my cyan file. Okay, so that is make directory as well as touch. Those are the two commands we saw in this video. Just remember that they run relative to where you are. So if you want to make a file in some folder, it's easiest if you navigate to that folder. And you can make 100 files at once using touch, and then open up an editor or something to actually work on those files. Okay, so next up, the last piece, we're going to talk about deleting stuff. Next up, let's talk about deleting files and folders. This is the last important thing. Well, there are other important commands, but this is the last of the fundamentals of working with files and navigating. So to delete a file, we have a command rm. I assume it stands for remove. And all we need to do is rm and then a space and then reference a file name, assuming that the file is in our current directory, or we need to reference the correct path to get to that file. Now, the thing you need to know up front is that this is not going to put it in your trash can or your recycling bin or whatever it's called. This deletes the file. It is gone. So you want to be careful with this, right? You don't want to go around deleting crucial files, although this is a Git course, and Git can help solve or alleviate these issues. If you delete something accidentally, if it was being tracked by Git, we can restore it with a single command. It's very easy and painless. Anyway, that's getting ahead of ourselves. Let me demonstrate how this works. Just remember, this permanently deletes the file. So what should we delete? If you want to follow along, you might want to just make something to delete first. So you could do touch delete me. So I didn't even give it a file extension. If we look at it, where am I? I'm in the turtles directory. I could always do pwd to verify. So that's right here. Here's the file I made. I could even rename it from here. How about we make it a .docx file, which is Microsoft Word. And it's going to ask me, are you sure you want to do that? It doesn't matter. I'm going to delete it. But I wanted to show you, if you make modifications here, I could even rename this. Delete me with a bunch of with a bunch of E's at the end. If I type ls now, this is up to date as well. Okay, so to delete it, it's just rm and then the name of the file. And that's because I'm in this folder. So I don't need to reference some other path. This is exactly what I need. If I hit enter, you can see it disappears. Whoops, that's not ls. I meant to type ls. It's gone. So it's not coming back. We're not using Git right now. So that is gone. That file is totally gone. So let's make two more files to delete just really quickly. How about delete.txt and remove.xls? I think that's Excel. Maybe not. Wow, whatever that extension is. I thought it was Excel. It doesn't matter. I'm going to delete them. So I'll do them together. They're both here. You can see them there. rm delete.txt space remove.xls. They're both gone. Okay, quickly, I'll show it over here. Let's delete the cyan file that I made on my Windows side. So here it is, cyan.js, rm cyan.js. If I type ls, it does not show up here. And if I look over here in the file explorer, it's not here. Maybe there's a way to make this larger. There we go. Well, still, it's not here. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is deleting folders. If I want to delete this folder, land turtles, right there, I cannot use the rm command as it stands. Land turtles like that. It says, nope, land turtles is a directory, rm deletes files, or at least rm the way we used it. So we actually have a variation of rm. In order to delete a folder or a directory, rm-rf. We haven't talked about flags. This is just a crash course on the basic terminal navigation, the essential commands you need to know. But all of the commands we've used actually accept a bunch of options that modify how they behave. So as a quick example, ls actually has a couple of other variations. One is ls-a, which is going to show me hidden files. So that -a modifies the behavior of ls. It says list all files, including hidden. Hidden files start with a dot, so there's a hidden file. This will actually come up when we make a Git repository. It makes a hidden directory for us. Anyway, getting ahead of myself. So these flags are different options we can pass in. And there are two we will use on rm if we want to delete a directory. R and F. We don't need to go too much into what they mean. They stand for recursive, that's the R, and force is the F. Basically, this is how we delete a folder. But you want to be careful with this, because just like with deleting a file from the command line or from the terminal, it's gone. So if you delete a directory that's full of important stuff, and it's not backed up somewhere, it's not in the cloud, it's gone. That's kind of end of story. So let's say I want to delete the entire turtles directory. Why don't I start by deleting land turtles? I didn't mean to type this, by the way. So I want to delete land turtles. Again, rm land turtles does not work, but rm-rf land turtles will. It's gone. There's no land turtles here. But that was an empty directory. If I try and delete turtles, which itself it doesn't have a lot, but turtles has cturtles, a folder, and george.py, a file. I'm now in the directory above it. I'm in pets. So I'm going to try deleting it. So I'll clear. By the way, on a Mac, that shortcut, if I have a bunch of stuff, to clear is Command K. Anyway, I'm in the pets directory, and if I want to delete turtles, rm-rf turtles. So you'll see it over here. There it is. And there it goes. It's gone. And that's it. I can't navigate into turtles. It doesn't exist. No such file or directory. But remember, I need the -rf to do that if it's a folder. If it's just a file, I just do rm. And either way, those are gone. They're gone for good. So be careful. Don't go around running this command on very important files and folders. Just always take a moment to think about what you're doing because you don't have that intermediate step of dragging something to the trash. But not much of this course really relies on deleting stuff, to be honest. It's mostly creating things and tracking those things with Git and changing those files. So it's not like we're going around deleting a bunch of stuff. I just figured you should know about those commands because they will come up every so often. All right, so that's rm and rm-rf. They're both the same command, just a variation to delete folders.